When you stumble into a job listing titled Night Custodian, urgently needed, you don't picture Gothic spires slicing into fog or hallways scented with secrets and old wood. But here I am, keys jangling jauntily on my belt, my mop slapping echoes through the halls of the Matherin Academy, an elite school so buried in the northern woods that morning seems to touch here last. It wasn't what I expected for a lifelong busker. My audience used to be the chaotic ebb of the city night. Now my solos were for the statues lining the corridors, their chiseled eyes seeming to track every sweep of my broom. My predecessor, Keith, left me a single, wrinkled page when he handed over the keys, a list of 8 rules scrawled in haste, which smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and whiskey. He'd chuckled uneasily, the sound getting swallowed quickly by the Academy's thick, heavy air. It might sound a bit odd, Bud, but follow them. Trust an old fool. Rule 1, begin every shift exactly at 10 p.m., not a minute early or late. Time respects forms here. This first rule seemed trivial until my third night when, in a bout of defiant curiosity, I clocked in at 9:58 p.m. The corridors, previously lit by gentle flushes of moonlight filtering in, receded into a dense darkness that felt expectant asterisk. By 10:01, the regular, soft glow returned, and so did my breathing. Rule 2, the North Wing's 3rd floor must be cleaned last and vacated by 3:33 a.m. This is non-negotiable. It made for a cumbersome routine, but curiosity around this rule was a low priority. Until my mop sloshed pinkish water on that floor, water which was clear when I dipped it in the bucket. Rule 3, if you hear the sound of a classroom bell after midnight, find a mirror. Stand there till it rings thrice. Avoid all windows. The first time I heard a bell, its shrill ring slicing through the silence, I froze. The sight of my own bewildered reflection in the custodial closet's dusty mirror grounded me. The chime did ring 3 times, after which it was just my heartbeat heavy in my ears. There's no bell system installed. Rule 4, should you ever find a chalkboard message directed to the cleaner, erase it immediately without reading it fully. Monotony tarnished my vigilance when one night, halfway into erasing, I caught pay heed before the board went black. Nothing dire followed, just a lingering coldness, air sticking to my skin like damp sheets. Rule 5, never answer to whispers, no matter how familiar the voice. I haven't, though last Thursday I could swear it sounded like my late father, asking why I was late for dinner. He's been dead for 15 years. The other rules are kind of blurry, involve specific rooms and shadows I am told not to acknowledge, but the ledger of my nights at Matherin Academy filled fast with rule following till tonight. Tonight, while sweeping the lecture hall in the West Wing, a cool draft spiraled through, not entirely unusual, except this time it carried a light, tinkling laugh. A sound so delicate, yet so out of place, it made my spine stiffen. When the clock tower bell chimed once, marking 1:30, I noticed something from the corner of my eye. On the front row seat, directly opposite the lecturer's old oak podium, a book sat where there had been none before. A plain, worn leather cover with no title. Open, as if waiting for a reader. Not a typical left behind, this felt meant. My pulse taunted the eerie quiet. I approached, my rule-ridden brain screaming retreat, but fascination rooted me to the spot. As I got closer, the text on the page blurred, letters squirming like worms in rainwater. Then it settled. One sentence awaited. Thank you for breaking the monotony. Something shifted in the air, the weight of unseen eyes, perhaps, and in the depths of the academy, a classroom bell began to chime. I didn't need to count the rings to know it would be 3. There was no mirror in the lecture hall, only windows agape with dark, hungry night. The chime's echo lingered, vibrating down my spine. I counted the silence that stretched after, not daring to break it with so much as a breath. Unseen eyes seemed to press closer with each passing second, their gaze almost tangible against my skin. My fingers gripped the edge of the wooden lectern, the varnish smooth and cold beneath my touch. I should have left, should have fled the moment the unnatural pressure in the air tightened around my chest. But fear, thick and cloying, rooted me in place. Another breath, my attempt to steady shaking limbs, but it hitched halfway, snagged on a sound that shouldn't have been there. Footsteps. Not the echo of my own from earlier, wandering these haunted halls, but softer, stealthier. A deliberate padding. It was heading toward the classroom. My head turned of its own accord toward the hallway door, gaping ominously open. The blackness beyond was absolute, a pool of ink waiting to drown me. Reason screamed that I should close it, lock whatever was approaching out in the shadow-drenched corridors of the academy. But my body betrayed me, frozen, eyes locked on the darkness, as if the very act of observing could ward off the horror lurking there. The footsteps halted abruptly just outside the room. I could almost feel the pause, the unseen creature's breath gathering for whatever came next. My teeth gritted, jaw clamping tight enough to ache. And then, whisper-light, a child's giggle floated through the stagnant air of the lecture hall. The sound twisted through the shadows, a sinister threading between the worn desks and empty chairs. It swirled around me, a cyclone of lost innocence and mocking laughter. I stared into the empty hallway, my throat too tight to call out, my lips sealed by the cold dread flooding my senses. The giggle ceased as suddenly as it had begun, replaced by a low, mournful sobbing that seemed to seep through the walls themselves. My hands trembled, releasing the lectern to clutch at my chest, over the heart racing to escape its cage. It was as if the academy itself wept for forgotten tragedies, its past bleeding into my present. "Just a building," I whispered through chattering teeth, my voice a foreign sound in the oppressive silence that followed the sobbing. "Buildings don't cry." It was a feeble attempt to cling to sanity, to deny the building's lament the validation it sought. Compelled by a mix of dread and an unbearable urge to know, I stepped towards the door. Each footfall felt like a betrayal of my desire to flee, yet forward I moved, as if pulled by strings I couldn't see. The cool wood of the doorframe brushed against my fingers, and I peered into the consuming darkness. Nothing. I squinted, willing my eyes to adjust, to pierce the velvet depths and find the source of those plaintive cries. Perhaps part of me hoped to dispel the fear with logic, to illuminate whatever stray cat or hidden speaker emitted these sounds and laugh off my rising panic. It was then I realized, too late, that the air around me was growing colder, almost biting. My breath misted before me, swirling and curling like the smoke of a snuffed candle. Behind me, the chill air pressed forward, a silent, icy exhale. I spun around, the motion dizzying too fast, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't felt form. The room was different. The desks and chairs, once scattered haphazardly, were now orderly, regimented rows facing the lectern where I had stood moments before. And on each seat, a figure sat, head bowed, their outlines fuzzy and indistinct in the low light. But I could see the tops of their bowed heads, could almost make out the fabric of their faded, dated clothing. A chill ran down my spine as a voice, soft and achingly familiar, whispered right beside my ear. "They've been waiting for you." My entire body jerked away, stumbling back from the spectral assembly, my back slamming against the chill of the window. The glass vibrated with my impact, a sharp, short shriek that mirrored my own. Outside, the night pressed against the pane, an abyss watching, always watching. The figures remained motionless, heads still bowed. But I saw it then, the slightest movement, a twitch, perhaps, indicating awareness of my terror. One head began to rise, slow, inexorable, turning my way. I didn't wait to see the face beneath the shadow. Lunging away from the window, I sprinted for the door, the icy breath of the room chasing me, urging me faster into the suffocating night beyond. I burst through the door, tripping over the warped threshold and scraping my palms against the gravelly path. The cold air clasped my throat, tightening its grip as if the house behind me exhaled a frosty sigh of pursuit. I didn't dare look back, but rather focused on the desperate melody of my sneakers slapping the hard dirt road, syncing with the frantic drum of my heartbeat. The road was a dark ribbon unwinding under the hesitant moonlight that seemed to wane, aware of the night's sinister tone. As I ran, each shadow thrown by the skeletal trees felt like a silent sentinel, tracing my every move with unseen eyes. My breath formed thick clouds that seemed to linger longer in the air than they should, hanging there like specters of my own making. I convinced myself that the desolate landscape was better than the house. That outside, beneath a sliver of moon and the watchful stars, I was safe. It was the inside that harbored nightmares. This open road was just a road, cold and hard and real. Yet as my footsteps echoed a lonely cadence into the night, I felt the air around me charge with a whispered warning. My heart stuttered as a rasping cough broke the rhythmic pounding of my flight. It was a harsh, dry sound that seemed too close. I faltered, nearly stumbling before my instincts screamed to not stop, not to even slow. I squeezed my eyes shut for a splinter of a second, wishing the sound away. When I opened them, a shadow flitted across the road, a shape too grotesque to form a rational thought around it. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold clawed up my spine. Pushing harder, I forced my legs into an awkward, panicked gallop. The road turned sharply. I should have remembered this. I had walked down this very road countless earlier, tranquil evenings. But wrapped in the panic cloak now, it seemed alien and menacing. As I steered myself around the bend, my foot caught on something, maybe a root, or perhaps nothing at all, and I went sprawling into the undergrowth. The ground was colder than the air, and the brittle leaves and twigs crackled under my weight, crying out loud against the quiet. For a moment, too shocked to move, I lay there amongst the debris of the autumn, my breath shallow, eyes wide open in fear. My mind, in its terrified state, knitted wild thoughts together. The figures hadn't advanced with some ghastly purpose. Perhaps they'd push me out into an even darker fate. Was the road, the trees, the very soil part of this macabre tapestry? I shook off the ridiculous notion. These were delays concocted by my overheated brain. I needed to get up. I needed to survive. Grimly, I pulled myself up, trying to ignore the wet clamminess of my palms and the raspy breath that seemed too laborious now. I resumed my journey, slower, each step a calculated risk. My mind spun, replaying the twitch, the icy feel of the room, the phantom cough. A flicker of white caught my eye, jarring against the omnipresent dark. There, just off the roadside, partly shrouded by a thicket, a faded, torn white dress that oscillated gently as if caressed by an invisible wearer. A desperate sort of sob caught in my throat. It was absurd, impossible, yet it dangled there like bait or a warning. Was my mind crafting these horrors, or had they always resided here, tucked away in the rural shadow play? Another rasping shuffle, farther off this time, and my gaze snapped to its direction, to the darkness beyond the trees where shapes moved with deliberate, unhurried malice. The moon, perhaps sympathetic, veiled itself behind a sweep of cloud, plunging my world into uneasy blackness. As the last shred of light seemed to evaporate, my legs found their vigor anew, and I ran towards the nearest hint of civilization, driven not by sight but by primal, shuddering terror. What awaited me there, in the frail sanctuary of lamplight and locked doors, I couldn't guess. but anything was better than the grasping fingers of the night that had once seemed so passive, so innocuous. The distant barking of a dog, or perhaps a warning howl, carried across the wind, tying my stomach into knots. Whether it heralded salvation or signaled the commencement of a deeper nightmare, I could only run onward, enveloped by the chilling embrace of the unknown. Leaves rustled ominously as I darted through the narrow path, each exhale a white vapor in the twilight chill. The woods around me, a twisted gnarl of shadows, seemed to pulsate with hidden life, ever watchful, ever waiting. My feet hammered against the cold ground, my only solace the rhythmic thud that drowned out the scream of my thoughts. Up ahead, an orange glow flickered, a possible refuge or a beacon into further peril. The barking had ceased, ousted by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow whole the sound of my escape. A twinge of hope fluttered against the cage of my ribcage, desperate and fleeting. As the flickering light grew closer, its source revealed itself. A solitary lantern swayed from a low branch, unattended. Underneath, an old wooden sign warned, "Beware the hollow." My pace slowed, breath curling like smoke as I peered into the brooding woods, searching for the eyes I felt upon me. The lantern's dance cast more shadows than it dispelled, and I hesitated, caught in the snare of indecision. The whisper of movement tugged at the edge of my senses, a subtle shift in the darkness. But I saw nothing. No eyes, no creatures, just the cruel embroidery of night layered upon trees. I approached the lantern with trepidation, its glow harsh against the encroaching dark. My fingers brushed against the cold glass, the slight warmth a mocking contrast to the ice in my veins. I should move on, deeper into the woods, but the silence, thick and suffocating, anchored my feet in place. Then, rustling, distinct and deliberate, snapped through the silence behind me. I whirled, eyes wide knife of fear slicing through my thoughts. Nothing, just the endless, mocking dance of tree limbs in the wind. A beast of paranoia gnawed at my entrails, churning the earlier dread into a frenetic terror. Gritting my teeth, I seized the lantern, its chain cold and slightly rusted in my grip. The path forward was mottled with light and dark, and every step seemed to draw the noose tighter around my neck. Leaves crunched underfoot, breaking the quiet in sharp bursts that sounded like shotgun blasts to my frayed nerves. A sudden cry pierced the night, high, mournful, and far too human. My breath hitched, each beat of my heart a thunderous echo in my ears. I stumbled, the edge of panic blurring my vision, and my knee hit the ground hard. The lantern swung from my grip, casting eerie shadows that lunged and twirled around me. Scrambling up, I pressed onward, the cry still echoing, morphing now into a prolonged wail. It was ahead, somewhere in this tangled labyrinth of chilling whispers and deceitful shadows. "Help me," the voice serrated the night again, clearer this time, tinged with despair. I moved towards it, part of my mind screaming to flee, the other compelled by a raw, undeniable empathy. The lantern's light trembled in tandem with my hands, revealing little more than snippets of the path, enough to avoid tripping over roots. Ahead, the wailing ceased abruptly as if cut by a blade. Silence crashed down once more, oppressive, absolute. My steps slowed, every instinct screaming that I was walking into a trap not set by human hands. But what choice did I have? Behind me was nothing but the vast, devouring darkness, ahead the unknown. I reached a clearing, the lantern's gleam catching on something wet and dark against a tree at the far end. My heart suspended, then sank, a stone drowning in dread. Approaching, the details coalesced into a nightmare. A figure pinned against the bark by what appeared to be thick, sinewy vines, their mouths agape in silent screams. Frozen, I stared as the figure's chest heaved, a suffocating attempt at breath. The vines tightened, burrowing deeper into the flesh, sucking the life out of what remained of its victim. The lantern fell from my numb fingers, its light flickering one last time before succumbing to the darkness. As the shadows claimed me, the last thing I heard was not a howl, not a cry for help, but a low, hungry growl right behind me. Silence was no longer suffocating, it was predatory, and I had run straight into its den.